Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 7 of my new Discovery build. Working on some modifications on the command sphere, including attaching magnets and some other ways in order to connect the sphere onto the spine itself, and getting those done. Also working with some parts from the Stargazer kit to modify some of the parts that came with the Moebius kit as well for the sphere. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so as I showed in the previous video, the door itself doesn't come with any detail, it's just flat inside. I guess the assumption is you're going to use a photo etch set, probably Paragraphics, which would have a door to go inside it. So what I did was I cut it out, and I did a lot of dremeling on the inside to make it flat, so this would fit a little better on the inside. A little accurate resin piece from Stargazer. But it's not curved, it's just flat. And that's why I was doing that. But after playing with it a little bit, if it's flush on the inside, then there's still going to be that thickness of the wall, and I don't want to make it too thin. So I decided to sand it out a bit more so I can actually slide it in from the outside and make it flush with the edges, and then I can fill that in a bit. I also glued on that little piece of photo etch there from the green strawberry kit. They didn't have one that I could find for the left side piece, so I just left that alone as it is. I'll just paint that something. And while I was sanding the inside, I kind of caused a little bit of a sinkhole there on the bottom under the door, which I patched in with some putty. I may have to do some more on that still, so okay. But let me work on this some more and then see about getting this inside of that, and then I can putty around it once I get it where I need it to be. All right, so a little bit of sanding on the edges of the part and the opening. And also I heated up some water in a microwave until it was boiling and let it sit for a few seconds. Dipped the part in with some tweezers and then just bent it with my fingers to get a curve into it, so it would fit more along that curve. So, all right, so it's fitting in there nicely. And it's flush, so I just need to get that glued in and put a little putty around the edges that are exposed and let that dry, and then I'll sand it down. All right, so I did some initial puttying and sanding around the edge of the door. It's still a little rough, but I'm going to let that go for right now. We'll come back to it. Mostly once I get a coating of paint over it, I'll be able to see more where it needs to be filled in and get that working, but otherwise it looks pretty good. I really like that more detailed door and inset the way it's supposed to be. So I'm continuing on with some modified parts from the Stargazer kit, which are pretty awesome. Finally, somebody made a separate ring for the door with the ridges in it, because the kit part from Moebius is all one piece for some crazy reason. I don't know why they did that. Because if you want to show a door open, what are you going to do? Leave this out and just have this bare piece of plastic? It doesn't look right at all. So with this one, you could just glue the rings in separate. You could leave a door open. It has a separate doors, which are resin as well. Look very good. And it has this part which I really like. This goes on the inside of the wall, and it adds all that detail that you would really see inside of the pod bay. So this goes, these three just go right in here, and they fill out that detail. So if you're looking through, like especially over on this side, if you were looking from the inside in there, you're going to see that detail. So it's pretty cool. And the way it's designed, if you were to build the pod bay from the Stargazer kit, which I didn't do, of course, this would all marry very nicely with the interior, and it would just really finish the inside to look like it's supposed to. But what I'm going to do is use these anyway And I'm going to glue these rings in, and I'm going to use these doors. And I'm going to work out a method for being able to remove the doors on the center and the left side, where I have the ability to move the extended pod, and also to see inside the ship and see the interior. So I'll be able to do that with these. These get glued on, then the rings get glued on, and then we'll figure out what I need to do with the doors. I might come up with some idea. They're pretty thin, but I don't know if I could do something with magnets. We'll see. We'll figure out something once I get these going, and then modify the sphere. Okay. All right, so I'm working on figuring out a way that once these parts are inside the hull, the command sphere like this, that I can add the door from the outside and remove it, so that the pod platform can be removed and switched between the center and the left. So the client has some options of moving those between it. Now, initially what I did, and I showed in the previous stills, is I took the original kit part, and you can see how it's drawn on here, kind of the pieces I cut out. Sorry, it doesn't want to focus. Focus! So, a little piece of the bottom, a little piece of the top to look like they are, looks like it's open. And then glued them into here. There we go. Glued them into here. You can see there in the top, and a little bit in the bottom. And they're glued in the back. And I put some magnets on them. I had to move the bottom one in order to make the least amount possible, because there really is very little clearance in this opening for the pod bay platform to be removed and put back in. Very little clearance because of the scale. So the best way for it would be, the most optimal would be nothing in there at all. In fact, not even the ring. The ring itself even adds a little bit extra. You can see there it is without the ring, there it is with the ring. It substantially reduces the diameter of this, so it makes it tricky. But it can be done with the ring, and I definitely want that ridged bezel in there because that gives it the proper appearance, and I don't want it to not have that bezel. So the initial idea with this was with the magnets there, that I put some metal on the ends of each one, and I've since adapted this, and I'll explain that in a moment. But I didn't have this stripping around the inside of it. I just had the metal. And when I stuck it on, those two pieces of metal are right at the edge. And what those are, they're just a thumbtack that I snipped off the sharp part, and I cut it in half, and I just glued it in on the top and the bottom because it's round and it has a curved edge already. Now it did go on and hold a little bit, but if you shook it at all, it was just going to fall off. So it was a problem. And then even at this bare minimum, it was still not quite. I mean, it was still just barely letting you get that. Come on, why aren't you focusing today? It was barely just not letting you get that platform to come in and out. So I decided to go with a different route. So I took this one that I had already modified, and I used some stripping, as you can see, some of this. And well, first of all, I made this part, and it has a little bit of a lip inside. So what I did was I put the door in it, and then on the inside I could glue around until this fit directly into that opening. And so now what it does is it just goes right into that opening, and it has a little bit of a grip. It's not quite straight, but you can get the idea. So it fits into that. Actually, it doesn't go to this one. It goes into the one on here. But it does fit. And basically what you're getting is the that ring is going down. Sorry, I just have it taped in there. There we go. And it just kind of clicks lightly in place. And you can see in there that it fits perfectly within that circle. And then I still have the metal on there, so what can happen then is if you want to remove it, and I just have this little magnet, but you can get a bigger one, you can just use that to pull it off. And then you can replace it as needed. And then this won't have any of those things showing the open door in it at all. So that way it's going to work. It's going to let it go in and out. It's still a bit tricky, but I think this method will work the best. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do the same thing on the one over here. The one that I already made with these, I'm just going to, I'll probably pop these magnets off, but I'll just glue the door onto it and put it on the right side because this one's not going to open. You're not going to be able to see inside there. And then that way I'm not using this method. I may possibly, we'll see. I could pull these off. Oops, be careful with that. And possibly make that door like these if you do want to look in there. We'll see. But I think that's the method that's going to work and allow the client to be able to remove the door, put it back on with the least amount of trouble, and not really have any magnets on the inside that have to hold that in place. Okay. All right, so I showed in the sped up video, I created the one for the right side. So to have this positioned right, because these circles aren't exactly perfect, so I wanted to fit in just the way it's supposed to be in the right positioning. So the way these are designed, this V shape is at the top and the single one is down at the bottom. So as you can see from this here, that notch goes at the bottom. This is a piece from the kit. So it looks like a Y, basically. So, so the first thing I do is I stick it in there snugly and I tape all around it, like I did, so it stays in place. And that way when I flip it over, I have a natural edge to work with. And the best way to do this is always to be able to glue this in position. And I'm only putting glue on the inside, so it's not gluing the piece into the actual part here. And I'm just using CA glue, odorless is what I use here. Works really good. And it dries pretty quick, of course. I just put some onto a piece of cardboard and apply it with a toothpick, because I can throw those away. So I went around and I put the stripping around the entire piece. When I made it a little bit bigger than it needed to be. So when I got to the end, I just snipped it off, just marked it and snipped it off. And then before I did that, I used my X-Acto knife and I just wrap it around the metal part and curl it around several times, so I get a part that's naturally curved, so I'm not forcing it into a curve. And then it works out really good. So then I have this piece done. And I'm using this little notch at the top and this little notch at the bottom to line up those two pieces. So the center of the V at the top, and of course the middle of this piece right here. So when we're all done, this piece just clicks into place. It's a little crooked, but okay. And it just snaps into place. And then on the inside, you can see it just goes in there and it marries up. And I can always adjust that. I can sand down some parts that aren't meeting quite right, or even add just a little bit of thin stripping to make it a tighter, snugger fit. So, okay. So I have two of those completed. Let me just finish the last one. And then I'll be ready to go ahead and get these pieces here glued into the kit. And then see how those look. All right, there we go. So I have them all completed. Obviously the doors are not glued in place. They're simply just stuck in there. As you saw in the previous video, I took a little bit of plastic putty and I stuck it around the edge. It's just a slight gap where those rings fit into there. And they have to be cleaned up a little bit more, and maybe a little bit more added in as well. But I have all three of these sections glued in place, and I marked them so you can see left, center, and right, so I know where they are. And then the two ones on the left and the right, I glued on a piece of metal. I went ahead and decided if we want to leave the one on the right side here removable, we can do that as well. It's not a big deal. So, okay, so those are all completed except a little bit of cleanup around the edges. The doors are removable, so once I'm ready to paint this, I can take the doors off and paint those independently, so I don't have to worry about getting any paint where I don't want it to be. And then also the nice thing about those ridges in there, those rings, not the rings, but the extra styrene I put in, is that it'll be great for light blocking once I get this painted black on the inside, and have those rings obviously painted black as well on the inside. You're not going to have any light escaping from the pod bay when you have the doors on, and the doors themselves will be painted black as well, so they'll be light blocked in the inside of this ship. So okay, so this is all completed. The door is completed that I added on. So that's all I need to do right now for the modifications on the bottom of the sphere. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to creating the magnets that are going to hold the top of the sphere onto the back collar so it can be removed. Okay. All right, so I finished the inside supports, at least the styrene part, and I just used some Plastroc Blondine, which dries really quick. So this stuff is great. So basically I just cut a piece of styrene that fit that curved edge, and then it came out to the edge, and then I just traced it off so it fit. Once I got one piece that fit, I just traced it and just replicated it for all three of them. And again, they don't have to be perfect. They just have to have the magnets in that position where they are right now, as you can see. So they're kind of flush with the edge of this. So when I have it on the ship, there's going to be a corresponding plate that's the same shape with another magnet that matches up with it, and then some more of these supports coming back into the top of the sphere. All right, so I'm gonna let those dry, and then once they are, I'm going to go ahead and put some a lot of 5-minute epoxy on the inside and around the edges just to really secure those in nice and solid, and I'll let that dry overnight before I do the other half to go into the sphere, because the magnet's pretty powerful and I don't want them pulling loose and breaking that off. Okay. All right, so as you can see, I have 5-minute epoxy that's dried overnight around the ones that I put onto the collar. So they're nice and solid, they're not going anywhere. So what I did was I taped this in place where it's supposed to be, and I cut out some corresponding shapes that are going to be glued onto the sphere part, and lined them up, made sure they lined up, drilled through some holes, and put in some magnets. They're not glued in yet, but you can see they all line up and the magnets are the right polarity, and that's the important part. These are actually not all in the same polarity, so this one might not work with that one, but it doesn't matter. As long as these ones are in the right polarity, that's all that matters. So you want to put these in position, because that way I know, besides the polarity, that they're going to be where they ought to be. And so I have those touching the outer part of the sphere. And what I need to do now is go ahead and dab on some CA glue onto the top of these to get those magnets to be glued in place onto these pieces of styrene. Let those dry thoroughly for a few hours, and then I'll be ready to go ahead and build the other structure that will come back and glue onto the back of the sphere, so that this part will be solid on the sphere, and then fill those in with 5-minute epoxy as well. And then that way I know that they're going to be positioned where they need to be, so when I bring this in and put it on, it's going to be exactly where it needs to be. So okay, let me go ahead and get some CA glue on those magnets, and then we'll get this get these attachments finished up. All right, and here is the completed magnets on the back collar and the upper sphere to hold the upper sphere in place. And this is how it'll be oriented. And the bottom sphere is going to be glued onto the piece here. And that's where most of the internal electronics are going to go. The pod bay is going to be in there, and that has probably the most weight to it of the front. And so this is able to be removed. And then of course the collar itself will be connected on the back via magnets, and I have some other ideas as well, which I'll be working on. But so again, the key to making this work is get the ones on the collar in the first place, the ones there at the bottom, get them nice and secured. And I used some thinner styrene this time around and smaller magnets than I had in the past, and basically just used a 5-minute epoxy to make it nice and solid. It doesn't have to be pretty because you're not going to see it, it's all internal. And then when I did the top ones, it was important to line up the polarity with the magnets first with the pieces where they need to be. Once that's the case, get them glued in place. And then as you saw, I cut out the extra side pieces and glued them on. To get the curve where they're going to meet up with the inner curve, I simply held the piece of styrene sheet along this edge and traced it to get that slight curve. And then I just cut all the pieces out that were going to go against the curve part using that. And then it was an easy enough matter then to stick it against the wall and line it up against the other piece and just draw it on. And then again, once I got the one piece done, I just replicated it with the other ones and got it all completed. So, okay, so this is all complete. I'm gonna go ahead and work on some more modifications as far as the magnets on the back of this to go onto the spine as well. All right, so I'm working on the way to connect the command sphere, which is going to be glued onto the collar here. And as I showed, magnets are holding the top part of the collar, the sphere onto it, but the bottom part will be glued. So the entire command sphere I want to be able to have removable for purposes of transporting it and taking it off of the spine. Propulsion unit will be the same way. So what I'm doing is, first of all, the kit part, this part is the one that goes into the back of this. You can see the 3 little holes. And there are 3 little holes here, but there were actually pins, 3 plastic pins. They break off almost immediately. So unless you glue this in place, forget about the pins, just cut them off. I don't even have any on my current version of the model, I just have the magnets. So I decided on this one is I snapped the pins off, I drilled it out, and I'm using some aluminum tube to go down, and it also fits into this larger tube. So on one side I will have it glued into the part, probably this one, have it glued into here, and then I'll have this rod on the other side of this so that the tube can go through it. I'll have that rod glued into place here in 5-minute epoxy. Likewise, I cut out some holes for magnets, and I glued some plastic or some styrene tube on there, which is the right size of the magnets, and that's these ones right here. So this will go right inside. There's only going to be one, of course, on each side. Well, two on this side. I have to drill this out, 2 on this side, and then they'll marry up. So basically, I will have 3 aluminum rod tubes sticking out, 2 magnets. These will go into this piece, which goes onto this and attaches to the spine. And then you basically just line up the 3 pins, as it were, stick them in, the magnets will hold it in place, and that'll give it a nice strong connection. So, all right, so working on that, and have most of the front modifications just about complete. Maybe a few more little things I got to take a look at. Okay, so here's a little mock-up of how this is going to work. I have this on with a magnet, and then I just taped on the bottom for now. This will be glued on permanently. So you have the 3 aluminum tube sticking out, the 2 magnets that are glued in place. This is the back piece that will be onto this part and then onto the spine. So this will all be connected to the spine and will be one piece. So then what you're going to do is just line up the 2 pins in the magnets. Sorry if it's not in the frame. Best way I find is to line up the 2 on the bottom. Once you get those started, then the other one just goes right in, just snaps right into place. And that is really solid. Those 2 magnets are really solid. Plus the aluminum tubes give it a little more sturdiness as well. And then I don't want to pull that apart, but you can pull that off just like that. Okay. Right, and here is the completed part that goes right behind the sphere, attached to the collar with the magnets and the aluminum tubes that I have. And there's the hole down the center for the rod, which is still wide open. This will glue onto the spine part once I complete that and glue it together, obviously. And then, as I showed previously, the back of this then just magnetically connects right into that. So, okay. So those parts are all completed for now. I just still have to do a few more little modifications, such as a magnet on the bottom to hold on the stand, in case the client wants to put this on a stand versus hanging it on the wall, and some other modifications as far as putting on the electronics and that sort of thing. So, okay, but that's going to finish up this part and set that aside for the time being. All right, that's going to wrap up the video for this week. Definitely some more progress on the kit itself. So now that I've completed what I need to do for the time being on modifying the sphere, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the spine, putting together all the cargo parts, and I'm working on the propulsion unit to get that all put together as well. So then we can go ahead and get that painted. So stay tuned. A lot of really cool things coming up. As you saw from my last video, I got a new 3D printer from Elegoo, the Saturn. So I'm also going to start working on some 3D prints from that here shortly, and working on that as well. I will be returning to my Land of the Giants. I definitely want to continue working on that, so don't worry about that one. But I am focusing quite heavily on finishing my commission build here and getting this completed for my client. And then I also want to test out my new Elegoo Saturn and print something cool from that as well. So, okay, so stay tuned. Like I said, and I always say, a lot of cool things are still coming, and they do come. So hopefully I'm not disappointing with introducing some cool things here as I continue in my favorite hobby. So, all right, thanks to all my new subscribers, and I will see you next time.